Hi everyone and welcome to this video. So if you have entered the YA books part of the internet anytime within the last few years, you have probably come across at least some fae. I mean, they are everywhere. Super powerful, hot love interests with magic, maybe even with wings if you're feeling fancy. We used to have vampires, now we have fairies or fae. I'm gonna be honest, I have not read any Code of Something and Something books, but I have watched Carrie Can Read's videos, so that probably counts for something. If you haven't watched them, do that. They are awesome. That's truly next level. And I also did something else, and that is read a fair amount of Fae books the first time around. Well, probably not the first time. I'm sure that Fae romance is not actually that new of a concept. Anyway, in case you don't know or forgot, like I had, between all the vampires, we already had some Fae in the 2000s. And that was when I first read Wicked Lovely by Melissa Marr, which was first published in 2007. It is the first book of the Wicked Lovely series, and in this series we have 5 books, of which I read 3 or 4. I think 3. I definitely haven't read the last one. And now I read book 1 again, and pretty soon I thought, hey, I want to talk about that. So here we are. Welcome to me talking about it. This is going to be something somewhere between a book review, a personal and biased and kind of rambly book review, and a loose retelling of the story, and just some general thoughts that I had while reading Wicked Lovely. So if you haven't read it, I recommend you do that before watching the video, because I had fun reading it and you might too. Especially if you like that kind of YA protagonist gets sucked into a magical world that exists within our world or next to it and learns more about it and finds herself part of a bigger story. Yeah, if you like that, and if you like a romance plotline, definitely, and just an easy page-turner modern fantasy that keeps you interested without being too complicated, then I would really recommend you read the book before watching this video. And if you have, feel free to let me know in the comments what you thought of it. I'm always curious. So, last warning, spoilers ahead. Before I started, I took a moment to see if I remembered anything about the story, but it was really very little. There's fairies, obviously. There's a fairy king, or maybe multiple fairy kings. I don't know. There's something about summer and winter. There's also a human guy, and the fairies are invisible, or can be invisible to humans, which I remember as creepy. Yeah, there was absolutely kind of a creepy vibe around the fairies. Okay, let's get into it. We are starting with a prologue. The Summer King knelt before her. Is this what you freely choose, to risk winter's chill? She watched him, the boy she'd fallen in love with these past weeks. She'd never dreamed he was something other than human, but now his skin glowed as if flames flickered just under the surface, so strange and beautiful she couldn't look away. It's what I want. He goes on to warn her that if she is not the one, she will have to carry the Winter Queen's chill until another mortal chooses to take this risk, and explains that she will have to warn the next mortal not to trust the Summer King. If she refuses me, you will tell the next girl and the next. He moved closer, and not until one accepts, you will be free of the cold. She, we don't have a name for her yet, so she accepts these terms, and she takes the Winter Queen's staff and waits. He whispered, please, let her be the one. She held the Winter Queen's staff and hoped. For a moment she even believed. But then eyes pierced her, filled her like shards of glass in her veins. She screamed his name. Keenan! She stumbled toward him, but he walked away, no longer glowing, no longer looking at her. Then she was alone, with only a wolf for companionship, waiting to tell the next girl what a folly it was to love him, to trust him. So, we are starting strong and dramatic, but don't worry, this is a YA book after all. I had half expected the next scene to be set at school, but it's not. It seems to be some kind of bar where we find our protagonist, Ashlyn, playing pool. And one of the first things we learn is that Ashlyn isn't like the other girls. No, really, she is not like the other girls because she can see fairies. See them, hear them, feel them breathing down her neck and sniffing her hair. And I immediately thought I was right about the creepy fairies. So it's made pretty clear that seeing fairies not as great as it might sound. She describes them as ugly, scary, loud, definitely dangerous, and it seems really hard to keep ignoring them and not letting them notice that she can see them. The only way to survive was to keep that secret. Grams taught her that rule before she could even write her name. Keep your head down and your mouth closed. It felt wrong to have to hide, but if she even hinted at such a rebellious idea, Grams would have her in lockdown, homeschooled, no pool halls, no parties, no freedom, no Seth. She'd spent enough time in that situation during middle school. Never again. This is how our Ash is living. She doesn't like it, but she's used to it. But now we learn that something unusual has been happening for the last 2 weeks. And that is that 2 fairies had been following her around, who are described like this. The girl had long white hair, streaming out like spirals of smoke. Her lips were blue, not lipstick blue, but corpse blue. She wore a faded brown leather skirt, stitched with thick cords. Beside her was a huge white wolf that she'd alternately lean on or ride. When the other fairy touched her, steam rose from her skin. She bared her teeth at him, shoved him, slapped him. He did nothing but smile. And he was devastating when he did. He glowed faintly all the time, as if hot coals burned inside him. His collar-length hair shimmered like strands of copper that would slice her skin if Ashlyn were to slide her fingers through it. Not that she would. Even if he were truly human, he wouldn't be her type. Tan and too beautiful to touch, walking with a swagger that said he knew exactly how attractive he was. He moved as if he were in charge of everyone and everything. Whenever he came near, she could smell wildflowers, could hear the rustle of willow branches, as if she were sitting by a pond on one of those rare summer days, a taste of midsummer in the start of the frigid fall. And she wanted to keep that taste, bask in it, roll in it until the warmth soaked into her very skin. It terrified her, the almost irresistible urge to get closer to him, to get closer to any of the Fae. He terrified her. Remind you of anyone? So those 2 had been following her around, and every night she had been kind of successfully hiding, trying to escape them. But today the guy follows her into a comic shop and makes himself visible, looking like a human, which is something only some very powerful Fae can do. So he walks up to her, all charms and good looks, and tries to strike up a conversation. But Ashlyn is terrified, and their conversation goes, "Ashlyn, right?" Fairy Boy was beside her, his arm against hers, far too close. He glanced down at the comic, smiling wryly. "Is that any good?" She stepped back and slowly looked him over. If he was trying to pass for a human she'd want to talk to, he'd failed. From the hems of his faded jeans to his heavy wool coat, he was too uptown. He'd dulled his copper hair to sandy blonde, hidden at the strange rustle of summer, but even in his human glamour, he was too pretty to be real. And she just goes, "Not interested." But they talk a little. Well, he's talking, and she's making it very clear that she's not interested, like she said, but he doesn't care. So, Faye or no Faye, just take a hint and leave her be. She said no. It's going to be a theme. He's way too insisting, and I immediately don't like him. Also, maybe he's manipulating her with his fairy magic stuff because she hated herself for it. But the closer he stood to her, the more she wanted to say yes. Yes, please, yes to whatever he wanted. I don't know, maybe she's just attracted to him. But above all else, she's really scared of that guy. Eventually, he gives her his email address and she gets out of there, but not before he sniffs her like an animal. Love it when a guy does that. And when he leaves, the other fairy, the girl, whispers in Ashlin's ear, "Run while you can." And then we get a change in POV to, you guessed it, golden shimmery fairy boy, aka Keenan. So he's also the guy from the prologue, if you've missed it. I don't know if I like the multiple POVs in the story, but we'll see. And he's just kind of weirded out by the fact that Ashlyn doesn't want to date him, but is in fact afraid of him. At least he got that. Mortals didn't usually run from him, especially girls. Only one had ever done so in all the years he'd played this game. Well, we also get a description of Ashlyn, but she basically looks like all female YA protagonists of that time, so I'm not gonna read it to you. Pale skin, dark hair, small and thin and so dainty, which, quote, made her seem more vulnerable, easier to approach. I'm sorry, sir, you sound like a serial killer. He then, in his thoughts, dabs on her clothes, but hey, at least she has long hair. And you are really wondering why she doesn't want to date you. He's really not coming across all that likable, is he? We then get a little insight on the interaction between him and the other fairy, who now gets a name. Ashlyn had just been calling her dead girl in her head, but her name is actually Donia. And we learn that Keenan finds her beautiful, still as beautiful as she had been when she'd taken over as the Winter Girl. Beautiful, but not mine, not like Ashlyn will be. Donia is not impressed and informs him that she, Ash, doesn't like him, to which he responds, she will. He stepped outside and shook off the glamour. Then he said the words that had sealed so many mortal girls' fates. I've dreamt about her. She's the one. And with that, Ashlyn's mortality began to fade. Unless she became the Winter Girl, she was his now, for better or for worse. That was chapter 1. I won't be going on in that much detail, but I thought it's good if you get a good first impression of who and what we're dealing with here. I don't know if that is because I started to remember some things about the story, but I was immediately more interested in the dynamic between Keenan and Donia than in, honestly, whatever that was with Ashlyn. This girl should just trust her guts and stay away from scary but hot fairy guys. But let's go on. Ashlyn understandably is pretty freaked out by this encounter and still has some way ahead of her through the city. And I want to say here that I kind of like the way this is written regarding the descriptions of the places and the fae and just the overall atmosphere of this not very well off, kind of dirty city with cracks on the roads and abandoned houses. The dialogue is a little cringy, but in a way that is typical for the genre, right? So Ashlyn is too freaked out to go home, and where she goes instead is to visit Seth. He lives in a more rough, more dirty part of the city, but he does not live in a house. He lives in a train. I don't remember, but I probably loved that when I was a teenager. I kind of still love it now. Ashlyn likes it too. She describes it as beautiful with art and a garden, but what she appreciates most is that the train walls are entirely made of steel. And iron and steel are poisonous to fae. So that's the perfect place for Ashlyn right now. The second reason that this is where she's going is Seth. He's described as follows. Before she could, the door swung open, and Seth stood in the doorway, grinning. The streetlights made him look a bit intimidating, illuminating the bars in his eyebrows and the ring in his lower lip. His blue-black hair fell over his face when he moved, like tiny arrows pointing to pronounced cheekbones. "Starting to think you were going to bail on me." "Didn't know you were expecting me," she said in what she hoped was a casual voice. He gets sexier every day. Okay. He also has a pet snake, a boa, called Boomer. Seth gives her tea and they talk, but Ashlyn's thoughts quickly drift to Seth and how she'd recently started having the wildly stupid thoughts about him. Thoughts about giving in to his flirting. But Seth didn't date. He had a reputation as a great one-night stand, but she wasn't interested in that. Well, she was interested, but not if that meant losing either his friendship or access to his steel-walled haven. Not just a good friend then, but a good enough friend to have noticed that something has been worrying Ash. He asks her about it. She's kind of vague, and he gets out a notebook and a pen to take notes, to make a plan, and I thought that was cute. And Ashlyn eventually tells him about the Fae. She's never told anyone before, and it's hard for her, but it really goes surprisingly well. Seth reacts really great. He even takes notes on his notebook. I don't know if he thinks that she needs psychological attention or if he actually believes her, but either way, he wants to help her, and he seems to be a great guy. So far, we like Seth. We also learned some more about the Fae. Ash tells Seth that she has seen horrible things, and after that, Seth led her through the streets, as unaware of the Fae as everyone else they passed. But just having his arm around her made it seem less awful. Meanwhile, Keenan goes to visit his mother, Bera. Not a very nice lady, not a very motherly mother. She uses her powers to make it physically hurt for Keenan to just be at her house, while also giving him cookies. Not a good vibe. And I don't know, I'm still not all that convinced on the multiple POVs. I don't know if this is a personal preference, or maybe I'm just used to books like this being written in one-person POV, with like the whole story following the main character. But I still kind of have mixed feelings on seeing Keenan's side of the story and knowing more than Ashlyn knows. I mean, it definitely is interesting to see those interactions, to see a bit of Keenan's thoughts, him interacting with Beira, with Donya, and that's cool. Later we will also follow Donya a bit, which is great, but at least in the beginning, I think it kind of took me out of the story a little bit. I don't know, later when the story is more developed, I think I don't mind so much. I even like it to see multiple things playing out and not being limited to what one character is seeing and doing and knowing. But I think in the beginning of especially a magical or supernatural story like this one, I kind of like being led into the world as the main character is experiencing it. Do you know what I mean? But then it would also be weird to randomly start having other POVs later in the story. I don't know. I would be interested in knowing what you think about this. Do you have a preference between single POV or multiple POVs? Let me know. Anyway, back to Keenan and Beira. It's overall not a good vibe. Uninviting old mansion, unhappy, possibly recently beaten up servants, creepy pictures, not good. We learn that Keenan does not enjoy being there. We also learn that Beira is in fact the Winter Queen, and she is very much interested in hearing about Ashlyn. We also get a little bit more info on what happened to Donya. Remember, she made a choice, took a risk, and it didn't really go well. She took the risk and took the Winter Queen's, so Beira's, staff, and now she is the Winter Girl. And she has been for decades, and she seems to be getting weaker and weaker, so her time's running out. But we are reminded, Donya will do her part, I'll do mine. Nothing changes, not till I find the Summer Queen. Keenan stood up and stepped forward until he was looking down at Beira. He couldn't afford to let her browbeat him, no matter that she still had all the power. No matter that she'd sooner kill him than help him. Kings didn't grovel, kings commanded. His power might be bound, no more than a warm breath against her glacial cold, but he was still the Summer King. And he says, "You know I'll find her, mother. One of these girls will take the staff in hand, and your cold won't fill her. One day I'll have the full strength of the King of Summer, just as father did. Your reign will end. No more growing cold, no more unchecked power." Anyway, Beira knocks Keenan out with her power, and she goes to visit Donya, who lives in a cottage outside the city. It's a lonely place. Donya had over time scared off all the guards that Keenan had posted there, so they hide in safe distance in the woods now. And Beira came there with an offer, or a threat really. "Keep this one from taking the staff, and I'll withdraw my colt from you. Free you. He can't offer you that freedom. I can. Or, if you'd rather, we can see how much cold I can push you through before it uses you up. Don't fail. Lie, cheat, whatever. Don't let her touch the staff." Donya is like, "What?" and thinks to herself, there were rules. Everyone knew them. They sucked for Keenan, but they were there. What Beira suggested was far outside the rules. The next morning, after a nice breakfast with her grandma, Ashlyn lives with her grandma, by the way, because her mom died when she was born. So the next day, Ashlyn wants to get to school, but there's fairies everywhere, more than usual. She opens the door, fairies. On the street, fairies. As they walked a few blocks to school, Ashlyn's good mood vanished entirely. Fairies crouched in the alcoves, walked behind them, murmured as they passed. It was beyond disconcerting. And like an echo as she walked, she remembered that girl's comment, "Run while you can." Ash is in school, and when she gets out, Donya, who she, by the way, still calls Dead Girl in her mind, is waiting outside, sitting on her wolf. But Ashlyn can't really do anything because she's in the middle of her group of friends who are trying to convince her to come to some party or to have sex with Seth, because I hear he's got enough experience to be a prime candidate for the job. Trust me, for your first you want someone with finesse. In a throaty voice, Rianne said, "And I hear Seth's got finesse." Remember when I said the dialogue can be a little cringy? So Ashlyn's group of school friends, her girls, are almost exclusively talking about guys and parties. Sometimes drugs, sometimes Ashlyn and Seth. And Ash kind of fits the cliche of being above such topics, or at least apart from them. She's not part of this party world. She's not crazy about boys, but I guess she kind of has a valid reason because she just cannot allow herself to lose control, let her guard down, like drinking alcohol. But still, I kind of would have liked to, for her to have a friend other than Seth that she is kind of on the same page with, and not her be that one special girl that's concerned with the deep and serious stuff, and not guys, definitely. Like, you can be both. So Ash is walking home to a park, and I'm gonna put a content warning here for the next 2 minutes. Maybe I'll put a timestamp for sexual assault or attempted one. And I won't be going into detail. It's also not very explicit, but it's still uncomfortable to read. So, deserted park, group of guys, really bad situation. She tried to think, to remember what she knew about self-defense. Use whatever you can. Scream. Go limp. She did, letting her weight droop. He just shifted his hold. Then she heard a growl. Beside her was Dead Girl's wolf, teeth bared. He looked like a big dog, but Ashlyn knew what he was. Plainly visible to everyone and looking deceptively human, Dead Girl stood holding the wolf's leash, letting him close enough to the three losers that it wouldn't take much of a lunch to draw blood. Her voice was frighteningly calm. "Remove your hands." The two guys who weren't holding Ashlyn backed away, but the one holding her said, "Not your business, Blondie. Keep walking." The fairy waited for a moment, and then she shrugged and let go of the leash. "So be it. Sasha, arm." The wolf, Sasha, ripped the gash in the guy's wrist. So the guys run away. I usually don't like this girl gets into a bad situation and has to be rescued from assault kind of thing. But I think that's because quite often it's the male love interest that does the rescuing, right? And I feel like often it's used to make that guy look good in comparison to those other men. He gets to be the hero saving his damsel, so we should absolutely ignore all of his red flags. Think Colleen Hoover, think Twilight. So it's basically the same dynamic here. Donya is the savior in this situation. She's Fae, and Ash is very scared of her because of that. But here she did not do the scary things. She rescued Ash. And that's why I like it here, because first of all, she's not a male love interest, but also this, well, not trust yet, but connection that starts forming between them. It does not stand in contrast to any red flags, but it stands in contrast to Ash's fear of her as a fae. She felt like laughing, not in amusement, but at the growing sense that the rules she'd lived by were suddenly off. It wasn't fairies that attacked her, but humans. Rule number 1: don't ever attract fairies' attention. She had, though, and if she hadn't, what would have happened outside? So they go into a library just to be in a safe place, and Donya disappears for a moment, and she, of course, thinks that Ash can't see her when she's invisible to humans. So Ash can listen to Donya speak to another fairy and hears that Donya is furious about what happened, and she also seems to suspect that someone might have sent those men after Ashlyn. Donya then makes sure that Ash is alright and she has somewhere to go, and as she's about to leave, a group of fairies enter the library. All 6 were beautiful, moving like models, wearing clothes that looked like they'd been tailored for their willowy bodies. If it weren't for the flowering vines slithering across their skin, they'd look human. The vines, though, were like living tattoos, moving of their own volition, crawling on the girls' bodies. One of the girls spun across the floor in some old-fashioned dance. The others giggled and bowed to one another before following her. Then the first one saw Donya. She murmured something to the others, and they stopped. Even the undulating vines stilled. Wonder who they could be. Ash says goodbye to Donya, and we get these thoughts. Then Donya smiled. The fairy was beautiful, stunning, the way a storm is, when you wake up and see lightning streak across the sky, and probably just as dangerous. It's interesting how Ash starts to describe more and more Fae as beautiful, and not just the human-looking ones. Where have the creepy, scary ones gone? I'm sure they come back, but I just thought it was interesting. So Donya leaves, but the other Fae are still there. And have you guessed who they are? We have met the Summer Girls. Ash, of course, doesn't know that yet, but the Summer Girls are kind of chatty, and they are not only talking about how hot Seth is, everyone seems to think so, but also that she might share him with them once she joins them, the girls, and that she won't have a choice if she's the one. Also, they stroke and pinch Seth, and he feels it. I didn't remember that would happen, but that is so creepy. Like, it would also be creepy if he couldn't feel it, but just imagine feeling something like that out of thin air. Or maybe don't imagine. They walk home through a lot of fairies, and Ashlyn even thinks that Seth will have more than a few unexplained bruises the next day. And as someone who always has a lot of bruises and never knows where I got them from, that is just very creepy. But I like the concept, and especially I like what it leads to, because once they are back at Seth's train, Ashlyn and Seth both make lists of the touching and punching incidents of what happened to Seth. And I like that. Same as with the taking notes earlier. I kind of just love methodological, yeah, that reaction to supernatural stuff going on. I have to admit that I also always like it when characters in stories like that just go into full research mode on whatever they are dealing with. Give me looking through old books in obscure libraries. Give me Bella Googling vampires if you have to. Just have the main characters think for a moment before they're acting. And Ashlyn did think. She had them compare their lists of what happened, and Seth is like, huh, fairies then. Seth is great. They are speculating that he could feel the fairies now because he's open to the possibilities of it now, which I think, I don't know, I think it doesn't get a better explanation later. And I think that's kind of a little weak. And also, if that's true, what was going on in like the Middle Ages when everyone just believed in fairies? Did they all just feel getting punched and kicked and touched all the time? Because that must have been distracting. Anyway, Ashlyn does the noble thing and she tells Seth that he can still leave if this is all getting too weird, but of course he doesn't. And they discuss the situation with the summer girls and also piercings, while also getting kind of flirty. You need to move if I'm going to get down from here. She sounded breathless, not at all like herself, and it felt good. Much better than the worries she had been trying to avoid. Much better than thinking about the bad things she'd avoided, or the fairy that saved her, or them noticing Seth. Seth ignored her comment, staying perfectly still. She didn't move or push him back. She could have. Instead, she asked again, "What do you think?" He lifted one eyebrow, staring at her as he did. "Can never have too many piercings." She opened her knees, putting one on either side of his ribs, thinking thoughts she couldn't about him. That's what? He didn't move any farther, didn't close the distance between them. He might tease, flirt, but he didn't pursue her. It was her choice. In a world where so many choices weren't hers, it was a wonderful feeling. And honestly, this really did surprise me. In a good way, obviously. It has, of course, all those extra layers with them being friends and everything. But still, I think it's way too rare for a guy in a romance book or a romance plotline, a hetero one, to wait for the woman to make the move. Like, it is established that Ashlyn is comfortable with him flirting and with them being physically close, like hugging and stuff. But he doesn't take that as an invitation to go any further. And honestly, the fact that I'm surprised about that probably says a lot about the other books I'm reading. So let's go on. Ashlyn, for some reason that's not entirely clear to me, still has it in her head that it would only ever be a one-night stand with Seth. So she breaks the tension and moves back, and he immediately gives her room like he should. He poured them each a cup of tea and opened a tin of shortbread cookies. Then he put on his glasses and pulled out a stack of photocopies and books. She picked up her tea and followed him to the sofa, glad to be back on comfortable ground. His knee bumped against her leg as he sorted out his papers. Well, not entirely glad. He did the research. Remember what I said about reading the law and old books just a minute ago? Also, he did all that research before he first felt the fairies himself, just going on Ash's word. Like, what she told him is wild to most people, I would say. Would I believe a good friend if they told me about fairies? I mean, I might look up some stuff, but I think I also might look up what mental states can cause delusions like that. But maybe Seth did that too. So we learn a few things, like we already knew that fairies don't like iron and steel, supposedly sacred symbols like crosses, holy water. They also don't like salt. And Seth also found some herbs that are said to give mortals the ability to see fairies, which Ash already can, but he can't, right? But Ash is not all that interested. She's really getting a little restless. Who can blame her? She had a really rough day, and she decides she wants to go out to the city, see what's up, maybe listen into some more fairies talking about whatever is going on. They put on iron jewelry, they have salt in their pocket. Seth gives Ash some pepper spray, saying it might work on fairies, so they are good to go. The idea of looking for fairies went against every rule she'd ever learned, but she was going to do it, to try it. It was better than waiting. I need to try something, do something. I don't know if that's just me, but I think the writing could just be a little less on the nose. I also thought that at the "it's so great to have a choice" part earlier, where I just feel like the reader would get that without it having to be that explicit. Yeah, it's a small thing and might just be my preference. What also annoys me, and what happened here in the quote that I just read, is when the writing switches from third person to first person. This happens a lot in this book, so it's obviously on purpose. It's like little thoughts sprinkled in, but I really don't like it. She was going to do it, to try it. It was better than waiting. I need to try something. Is that just me? I don't know. Anyway, oh, also what I didn't tell you yet. At the beginning of every chapter, we get a little quote on fairies, such as for the next chapter, it is, "The fair folk were most skilled in music, and one of the great enchantments and allurements to stay with them was their music." Notes on the Folklore of the Northeast of Scotland by Walter Gregor, 1881. So each chapter has one of these, and I looked at some of them, and they all seem to be real quotes from actual books from like the 1900s. And that is a detail that I really liked. And also the quotes have something to do with what's happening in the chapter. So it's cool. Okay. Meanwhile, Donya and Keenan are walking through the streets, and he's all like, "Did you see her? Did you talk to her?" Ashlyn, that is. He held out a hand to carry her back, always solicitous, even now with his eyes glimmering over thoughts of her, of Ashlyn. And he smiled at her. For an instant she forgot everything. His betrayal, her suspicions about Beira, the aching cold. "He's as beautiful as he was when we met. I look pale and awful, but he's still gorgeous." Okay. Rough situation for Donya, honestly. But you really get this feeling that this is a dynamic that has been going on for decades, which it has. And somehow it's still so obvious that there are still so many unspoken things between them. But because they have known each other so long, Keenan also notices that something is up when he asks Donya about that visit from Beira. The offering a deal, breaking the rules one. But she doesn't tell him about it. And he has other questions anyway. He reached out to take her hand, but didn't. His touch would hurt her more than the iron did. Instead, he splayed his arms out on the wall on either side of her, palms covering part of the graffiti on the wall, making a prison of sorts with his arms. "Why do you come down here?" "To remind myself what I lost." She opened her eyes, holding his gaze. "To remind myself not to trust any of you." She was utterly impossible. He grimaced at her accusing look, at the decades-long argument. "I didn't lie to you." "You didn't tell me the truth either." She closed her eyes again. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Her cold breath mingled with his equally warm breath in the small space between them, rising like steam above them. "Go away, Keenan. I don't like you any more today than I did yesterday, or the day before that, or the—" He interrupted. "But I still like you. That's the beauty of this, isn't it? I still miss you. Every single time we do this, Don." He lowered his voice to try and hide how close it was to raw. "I miss you." Whew. I correct myself. Rough situation for both of them. Donya walks away. She takes a long walk until it's nighttime, and finally she comes to sit on a bench by a fountain. And while she sits on that bench, who walks by and approaches her? Ashlyn and Seth. I don't know how long they've been walking around in the city to find her, but they did find her. And it's kind of a weird encounter. So Ash and Donya make some small talk. Seth is somewhere else. But then Donya asks, "Do you still feel weird about the attack in the park?" And Ash answers, "I guess it freaked me out a little. Seems unreal, you know? And the sort of things that come out at night." Donya sat up. Things? It was an odd word to choose, an odd tone in her voice as Ashlyn stared toward the kelpies. There's kelpies in the fountain. Can she see them? How very unexpected that would be. There were stories of sighted mortals, but Donya had never met one. Ashlyn tries to save the situation It's not just guys like those today. Even the pretty ones can be awful. Don't trust them just because they're pretty. Which, solid advice, but you almost outed yourself. And Donya just says, where were you when I needed that advice? I've already gone out with the biggest mistake a girl can make. Fair. And what does Ashlyn say? Be sure to point him out if you see him around. It's kind of fun. Like, this random little conversation, well, it's not that random. They are talking about assault and warning each other about men, but it's a very human conversation that basically ends up in telling Ash, in Ash telling Donya to warn her about Keenan, which is what she has to do anyway. And Ashlyn leaves. She's walking directly towards some creepy looking, wait, I quote, cadaverous fae. And Donya thinks she'll swerve if she can see them, but she doesn't. So, good save here. And we end with, mortals don't see the fae. Donya smiled dryly. If they did, Keenan would never have convinced any of them to trust him. We get a little scene of Ashlyn being confronted by her grandma about what's up, and she's telling her that the fae are following her, and her grandma immediately says, okay, you're going to stop going to school, which Ash is still in high school. This is, I don't know, it's absurd. But she manages to reassure her grandma by herself sometime. Also, Ash is really oblivious to what's going on. Like, the summer girls literally said if she's going to join us, and she just keeps wondering about what they could want from her, and I don't know. But she never actually does any thinking about that. Anyway, after grabbing a quick bite, Ashlyn retreated to her room and closed the door. It wasn't a sanctuary. It didn't reflect her personality like Seth's house or Rianne's too girly bedroom. It was just a room, a place to sleep. Seth feels more like home. Seth feels like home. So the part about Seth was cute, but come on, what did Rianne do to you? We also had that earlier. I didn't read it to you, but she was talking about the summer girls, and she said or thought, I don't know, that they should find out if there's a Rianne type of fae, an overly shallow type. Like, maybe stop hating on other girls for just no reason. That wasn't cool in 2007 either. Let a girl have a girly bedroom if she wants one. Let anyone have a girly bedroom if they want one. Well, anyway, Ash calls Seth and she wants a bedtime story, and he starts with, once upon a time, there was a girl. And Ash goes, not a princess. No, definitely not. She was too smart to be a princess. Tough, too. Stronger than anyone realized. So, princesses can't be smart? Come on, Seth, I'm rooting for you. But the idea is cute. Ash asks, does she live happily ever after? And he goes, shouldn't there be something in the middle? But apparently Ash likes to read the ending first. And I don't know if this is just a right in this situation, which, understandable, she wants the princess to be fine in the end, I get it. But in general, who likes to read the ending first? Why do that? I'm confused. Let's go on. Neither of them said anything for a few minutes. She heard the sounds of traffic, of his breathing. She'd fallen asleep like that before, just holding the phone while he walked home, feeling that connection to him. Finally he said, did I mention how sexy she was? She laughs. And he gets home, she hears that, and she's all, I'll let you go then. And he asks, what if I don't want you to? She heard the music as he walked towards his room, some sort of jazz. Her heart sped up, thinking of him getting stretched out on his bed too, but her voice only sounded a little off when she said, good night, Seth. So you're running again then? One of his boots thudded on the floor. I'm not running. The other boot hit the floor. Really? Really. It's just... She stopped. She didn't have anything that would finish that sentence and be honest. Maybe you should slow down so I can catch you. He paused, waiting. He seemed to do that more and more lately, make statements that invited her to admit something dangerous to their friendship. When she didn't answer, he added, sweet dreams, Ash. After they hung up, Ashlyn held the phone in her hand, still thinking about Seth. It would be a bad idea. a really, really bad idea. She smiled. He thinks I'm smart and sexy. She was still smiling when she fell asleep. Okay, said I'm not going to tell you everything in so much detail. So far, that is not working. But I just have to continue with literally the next scene. Because when Ashton walked up the steps to Bishop O.C. the next morning, she saw them. Faithings lingering outside the door, watching everyone, and seeming strangely serious. Inside, more fairies clustered at the doorway to the principal's office. WTF? It's just written there, WTF in all caps. That's just so out of place. Anyway, fairies don't usually go to school. That is now something that I said. Who can blame them? I wouldn't either if I were a fairy. Ash thinks it's maybe because of religious artifacts, because it's a Christian school, but they are here today. And why could that be? Because their Summer King is there. Yeah, Keenan does not seem to share my sentiment on not going to school if I were a fairy. He just joined the class. Same schedule and everything. We are going to have to show him the way to calculus. Ashlyn has no choice but to make it through school day with Keenan as her shadow. Again, she has these urges to want to touch his hair and just him in general, but she's very aware of that. And like her whole life, she has been practicing self-control and focus to not let the fairies know that she can see them. And that is very useful now. And I like that concept, her having this self-control superpower because she has to deal with fairies every day. That's cool. I also like that she's just plain rude to him. Like she's not even trying. I'm sure you can figure out lunch without help. So, go make friends or whatever. And she walked away. He sped up to stay beside her as they entered the cafeteria. May I join you? No. He stepped in front of her. Please? No. She dropped her bag into a chair next to Rianne's things. Ignoring him and the stares they were attracting, she opened her bag. He hadn't moved. With a shaky gesture, she pointed. The line's over there. He looked at the throng slowly progressing to the vats of food. Can I get you something? A little space? A flare of anger flashed over his too beautiful face, but he said nothing. He just walked away. Anger, is it? I like that she's just so unimpressed by him. Like, he's described as so beautiful. He's radiating, inviting heat like a summer day. But she's just, nope, not gonna fall for the fairy magic. And that's cool to read. But eventually Ash snaps at him and goes, You'd be surprised at what I know about you. And you know what? None of it impresses me. Not one little bit. He laughed then, joyous and free, like the anger that flared in his eyes hadn't existed. Then I shall try harder. She shivered in foreboding, in sudden longing, in some uncomfortable mixture of the two. And also her friends are no help. They don't care that she's obviously uncomfortable. And Rianne goes, PMS. Then she tapped Keenan's hand and added, Just ignore her, sweetie. We'll help you wear her down. You know what? I never said anything. We do not need Rianne or her girly bedroom. But now Keenan's in our classes, and what is missing now? Discussing the situation during a lesson, talking about Shakespeare. Keenan reads La Belle Dame sans Merci for all of our Shakespeare people out here. It's a poem where a knight falls for a fairy and ends up dead, and yeah, you can imagine how that goes. Meanwhile, Donya goes up to Seth in the library. She randomly asks him if he's Ash's boyfriend for some reason. And she also notices that he smells of verbena and some other herbs, those herbs that are said to give people the sight, fairy sight. She then checks his search history on the library computer, so she knows they know. Keenan, after school, returns to his loft. He has a loft with plants and birds in it, and old pizza. And he also has two bros hanging out, Niall and Tavish, who give him terrible dating advice. Well, mostly Tavish does. They are actually not his bros. They are his advisors as king, so they are more like uncle figures. And we also learn that this search for the Summer Queen has been going on for almost a millennia. And you know what? I am not going to talk about creepy age gaps here, because that one makes Edward Cullen look almost cute. Just this is a moment to remember that Ash is 17, and he's done that to girl after girl for a millennia. I'm just not gonna talk about it. Also, something's going on with Ash. She shoves Seth just a little bit, and it stings him. And earlier she could hear a sheet of paper falling, like the sound. And she also overhears a fairy say, "She's changing already, becoming one of our court." Yeah, but Ash has other things on her mind right now. She'd seen him without a shirt before, seen him in his shorts. They'd been friends for a while. What did he say? Dinner? Dinner with Seth. She stood in his kitchen, watching him toy with the ring in his lip. It wasn't quite that he was biting it, but sucking it into his mouth. He did that when he was concentrating. It isn't sexy. He's not sexy. But he was, and she was staring at him like a fool. "Wow," she whispered. She looked away, feeling stupid. "We're friends. Friends go to dinner too. It doesn't mean anything." She opened the cupboard. The bottle of honey sat next to an old assortment of spices and oils. "Dinner, right. Carla wants to go to the new place over in Vine. You could—" "Wow, huh?" His voice was low, husky. His chair creaked as he stood. His footsteps seemed strangely loud as he closed a couple yards between them. Then he was beside her. "I can work with wow." She turned away, quickly, squeezing the bottle and squirting honey on the counter. It didn't mean anything. Too much flirting lately. And that call, and "I know you probably have a dozen girls waiting. I'm just tired and—" "Hey." His hand was on her shoulder, trying to turn her to face him. "There's no one else. Just you. No one for the last 7 months." He tugged gently on her shoulder again. "There's no one but you in my life." She turned, and they stood there. She stared at his shirt. There was a button missing. She clutched a bottle of honey until he pulled it out of her grasp and set it down. Then he kissed her. Okay, so he didn't really technically wait for her to make the move, but her reaction is to stretch up to him and get closer. So also, it's the most perfect kiss she'd ever had. But she soon pulls away and starts thinking again about, "Oh no, Seth doesn't date. It will ruin our friendship." Which, the friendship part is something I get, but you're already not really just friends anymore. You have to work on that either way. And about the not dating, just talk to him about it maybe. Did he tell you that? Because I don't think so. Also, this super perfect kiss includes kissing her like she was the air and he was suffocating. And maybe that's just my brain, but I don't really think that sounds great. Like, the way it's worded, I just kind of imagine him gasping for air. I don't really think that is a kissing technique that I personally want to experience. Anyway, they do talk a little after that, and she tells him that she needs to sort out the fairy situation first, which is fair. And he tells her, "I'll keep waiting, I'm not going away, and I'm not letting them take you away." By the end of the week, Ashlyn was sure of 2 things. Being with Seth had become beyond tempting, and avoiding Keenan was utterly impossible. She needed to do something about both situations. Her new plan is to stop running from Keenan and make him think he could catch her. And that leads to kind of awkward conversations at school, but also it leads to her finally being able to think a bit more clearer, because he's not constantly trying to lure her in with his attraction powers. But it also means she has to talk to him. "Why me?" Her heart sped as she waited for him to respond, as if he'd answer the real question. "Why not someone else?" He stepped closer, watching her predatorily, his mood shifting rapidly once more. "Honestly, I don't know. There's something about you. From the first time I saw you, I just knew. Girl, run." He took her hand. She actually let him play along. It wasn't just playing, though. She'd been resisting the need to reach out to him since they first met. It wasn't logical, but it was definitely there. Well, logical or not, she agrees to go to the carnival tonight. Just as friends, of course. Speaking of friends, Ash manages to talk to Seth about their little kiss situation, and he tells her that yes, he wants to date her. There's nothing casual about what I want. Yay for communication. In this scene, we also kind of randomly learn that Ash apparently is afraid of STDs, which valid fear. It does suck that those exist, absolutely. But it was kind of a random thought of Ash. Like, she has enough other reasons to not want something casual with Seth. So I don't know why that was included. Like, it kind of reads like casual sex is bad and you will get a disease from it. And like, not in a use protection kind of way, go get tested. More like a teacher from Mean Girls kind of way. I don't know, maybe I'm being unfair here because we will actually come back to this later. Maybe it's put in here so that later that's not so out of context. Anyway, Seth is great. He communicates what he wants after several months of silently hoping, but well. But he also makes it very clear that he never wants to pressure Ash and that they're gonna take it slow. Stark contrast to Keenan. At their date at the carnival, he's still acting weird. He's clearly never dated anyone who wasn't already super into him. And it's a fae carnival, by the way, so most people are actually fae. So Ash is really struggling to keep it together. And there's fortune tellers who pretty much confirm that Ash is the summer queen. So Keenan is in a great mood. He's already fantasizing about giving a great ball for her coronation, and he decides that they should dance right there in the crowd, where also many of the Fae have already started to dance, celebrating the rapidly spreading news about the Summer Queen. Ash is terrified, and he tries to convince her, "Dance with me, Ashlyn. I hear enough music for both of us. Give me this dance, this night. If it's in my power, I will give you whatever you ask in return." Ashlyn then proves she's a smart one and asks him to give her his word on that. And we immediately know she's on the right track because the fairies that are watching are very interested and they talk about her getting a king's vow. So good thinking, Ash. And he actually does. "Anything you ask of me that I can offer is yours." All for one dance, right? Well, they laughed and drank and danced until Ashley no longer cared why she'd been worried. If you're watching this video, chances are that some of you have read a book or two about fairies before. Did some of you just think, oh shit? Yeah, Ashlyn does not seem to know the actual number one rule when dealing with fairies. Don't eat or drink any of the fairy food. Did I just say Ashlyn is smart? Why didn't she do any research before literally going to a fairy carnival? I'm annoyed. For those of you who are a little bit rusty on their fairy lore, it is said that eating or drinking any fairy food means that you can never leave again. You belong with the fairies now. Remember that if you ever happen to have to deal with any fae. It probably doesn't make much of a difference though for Ash, because if our suspicions are right, she's probably already turning into fae anyway, so. Her hair fell onto the dew-damp grass as she looked up at him, the fairy king who held her in his arms, and wondered that she was having so much fun. He swung her back up and whispered, "Dance with me, Ashlyn, my love." Her legs ached, her head spun. She hadn't had so much fun since ever. Definitely. She does tell him not to kiss her though, at least for a while. But they dance all night, high on fairy wine, and when sunrise comes, Keenan whips out a picnic. Well, one of his servants does. They finally sit down and Ash goes, "Can I ask you a question? Why don't all the other fairies glow like you do?" And Keenan goes, "All the other what?" Meanwhile, Donia is not having a great night. Yeah, I didn't tell you that, but earlier Beira had been at Donya's home again, threatening her again, and to just make it clear that should Donya fail at her task to keep Ash from taking the staff, then Beira would kill her and turn her into shade. Also, Beira got mad at one of her people, helpers, subjects, and she killed her in front of Donya, so Donya's understandably scared. She allows one of the guards that Keenan had posted at her house to stay closer to the house, which usually she never allowed. But this one guard, she finally asks his name, so his name is Evan. He's always around, like the others are changing, but he's a familiar face. And in the morning, Donya asks him to send for Keenan. And he comes pretty much immediately, and Donya is all, I didn't know if you'd come, to which he answers, I'll always come when you want me. How many times have I told you that? That won't change. Ever. When there were no witnesses, he'd let himself be the person he'd been before she knew he was a king. The person she fell in love with. It was why she avoided being alone with him. No, she said, not wanting the gentle side of him, not now. Today she needed him to be the Summer King, to set aside the person he could be without the crown. She needed him to be arrogant and assured, able to do what needed doing. Donya tells him about Beira's threats. He wants to move her to his place away from Beira's reach. I'm gonna keep you safe, but she says you can't. She wished he could, but it was impossible. There was no winning, not for her. I want you to win. I always have, but I still have to try to convince Ashlyn not to believe in you, that you're not worth the risk. Those are the rules. Well, as Ashlyn wakes, she has a hangover and a blackout. The last thing she remembers is telling Keenan she knows about fairies and him kissing her. And after that, nothing. And she's understandably worried about what happened after that, as you would be if you went on a date and the guy gave you way too much alcohol, drugs, whatever, and used the situation to kiss you. No amount of, oh, he's faking, makes that okay. It's not cute or romantic or hot or whatever. And yeah, I have to read you another scene because I was a little scared of how Seth might react, because I think I'm really used to misplaced jealousy in situations like that in books. Thankfully not in real life. So she's at Seth's and she goes, I remember laughing, having fun. She looked down at her hands, clenched tightly so they didn't shake. I was having fun, Seth. What if I did do something? What if I said yes? And he says, doesn't matter. If you're fucked up, you can't consent. It's that simple. He shouldn't have done anything, Ash. If he did, he's the one who's wrong, not you. Thank you. Thank you, Melissa Marr, actually, for putting that in there. It shouldn't have to be said that explicitly. It shouldn't actually have to be said at all. But somehow it is still so necessary to tell that to people, especially to teenagers and young adults. Also, there's so much build-up for Seth here. Don't let us down. Ash then goes to ask Keenan about what happened between them that night, and nothing more happened. He's all, my fae don't violate people, they don't take the unwilling, but I guess that doesn't apply to kissing? I don't know. They can, however, talk more open now that Keenan knows that she knows that he's fae. It doesn't stop him from being weird and cheesy. Like, his words are almost as flowery as the descriptions of his scent and his voice and the overall summerness that is around him. It also doesn't stop her from noticing all of that and feeling very, very drawn to him. But she gets a grip on herself and she chooses this situation to use her free wish that he promised her. And she wishes for him to leave her alone. I don't know. I don't know if I'm telling this story too one-sided, but to me this is all so creepy. Like, he doesn't read like an actual love interest to me. No matter his tragic situation and all the feelings of summer that you get around him, he reads like a creepy stalker who doesn't even realize what he's doing to her. or care about it. Like there's literally a scene where he randomly talks to Rianne and she says, "You'll be good for her. She's always so serious, blah, blah, blah." And he just goes, "Huh, I never thought about being good for her." He does then think, well, I'm probably not good for her. She's gonna make a huge sacrifice. And I get that he can't suddenly change what he has to do. Like, he's caught in that situation as well. But he could at least feel bad about it. Like, the fact that he isn't even thinking about it. And he has been doing this for a millennia to who knows how many girls. And he's surprised by the thought, I never thought about being good for her. I'm getting too invested in this. Yeah, by the way, the wishing to leave her alone does not work, because he promised to do whatever is in his power, and leaving her alone is not. Once a mortal girl is chosen, she cannot be unchosen. At the end, you may reject me or accept me, but your mortal life is behind you. And she goes, no. She felt her temper, her lifetime of anger at fairies flare up. I reject you, okay? Just go away. But he says, you're one of us now, Summer Fae. Even if you weren't, you'd still be mine, still belong with us. You drank fairy wine with me. Haven't you read that in your storybooks, Ashlyn? Never drink with fairies. What did I say? Yeah, he finally explains that she's going to have to make this choice and that one option is becoming one of the summer girls. And honestly, I'm going from one rant into another, but the summer girls, that is so fucked up. The summer girls are bound to Keenan. If they are not close to him, then they will fade away and become a shade, so basically die. So they have to be close to him, they live with him and many others. One of the other Fae explicitly said earlier that once they are summer girls, their inhibitions that they had as mortals are gone. So they are quite inclined to having all sorts of partners. Good for them, except not, because that isn't their choice. It's like literally a change in their character that they didn't consent to. It is said that they are happy with their life and they believe they've won and made the right choice in that whole situation, and like they live a life of enjoyment. So most people in this story don't seem to think that this is a bad fate. It's an interesting concept. It's very blue pill, red pill, and it's really not explored that much in the book, maybe in one of the other books. So it is interesting, but it's also a concept I hate, especially because it's just never really brought up as something that is not okay. Like even Ash, she doesn't want that for herself, but she never questions Keenan on how he could think this is okay. And there's even a scene where Keenan asks for some of the girls, no names necessary, because he fancies some help relaxing, as he puts it. What the hell? So, what does Ash say to this option? I will not be a fairy in your harem or anywhere else. So be with me and only me. It's the only other choice. Then he bent down and kissed her, lips open against hers. It was like swallowing sunshine, that languorous feeling after too many hours on the beach. It was glorious. Ugh. She stumbled back until she bumped into the window frame. Stay away from me, she said, letting all that anger she'd been feeling show in her tone. Her skin began to glow as brightly as his had. She stared down at her arms, aghast. She rubbed her forearm as if she could wipe it away. It didn't change. He says, I can't. You've belonged to me for centuries. You were born to belong to me. He stepped closer again and blew on her face as if he were blowing the head off of a dandelion gone to seed. Her eyes almost rolled back. Every pleasure she'd felt under the summer sun combined into one seemingly endless caress. She leaned against the rough brick wall next to them. Go away. Her next move I thought was great. She throws a handful of salt at him. Remember, she had those salt packets, but sadly it only makes him laugh. And say, Salt, oh my lovely, you're such an exquisite prize. I'll be right back. I'm gonna go vomit. Next, she gets out the pepper spray, which at least makes him leave. Is this romantic to anyone? Like, are there any enemies to lovers girlies who like this? Because they can have it. Ashlyn goes to Donya for help and she starts looking through her clothes. This is helping? It is. Donya found it then, the one that fit Ashlyn. A Renaissance chemise that had been altered to blouse, strikingly white with an almost lurid red ribbon lacing from bosom to waist. Fairies respond well to confidence. I learned that too late. You must show him that you are not meek, that you will not be commanded. Go there, act as his equal, not a subject, and tell him you want to negotiate. For what? Ashlyn took the blouse, fingering the soft cotton. For some sort of peace. He's not going away. Your mortality isn't coming back. Don't start eternity with him believing he can tell you what to do. Start by putting him off kilter. Dress for battle. She also finally explains the choice that Ashlyn will have to make and that there is only very little time left. And Ash takes Donya's advice and her clothes and she calls Keenan. Where'd she get his number from? Maybe Donya. He is at his club. He owns a club. Why not? And he's immediately, I'm gonna come to you. But Ash is quicker. She walks right into the club full of fairies. Well, she tries to. She only makes it to the door. She's really trying that tough act. So she randomly flirts with the bouncer while she waits to be let in. Ashlyn, my queen, here, followed Eliza through the crowd. They parted for her as they did for him. She was lovely, a vision come true. The summer girls spun like dervishes. Winter fae sulked, and the dark fae licked their lips as if in anticipation. Others, solitary fae and the rare high court fae who mingled in the crowd, looked on, curious, but not invested in the outcome. It was as if his life, his struggle, were nothing more than a tableau for their amusement. But he realizes she wasn't smiling, not happy at all. She wasn't here to accept, but to fight, and everyone's watching. Seems to have been a good idea to come. So they talk, and Keenan finally tries another approach. What if I told you that you were the key, the grail, the book, that one object, good one, that will rescue me? What if I said you were what I need to defeat the one who freezes the earth? If your acceptance would save the world, all these fairies, your mortals too, would you do it? I think I mentioned it? Maybe briefly, but apparently it's not only the summer court that need their queen and need for Keenan to be a real king, but he also keeps thinking about how Beira during her reign as Winter Queen has gradually cooled down the earth and how he needs to change that once he's king. So I guess thanks for climate change, Keenan. Could have done without it. But Ash and Keenan are actually talking this time, and she says she doesn't care about the Fae, but she also starts to accept that there just isn't a secret better option. He held out his hand. I wish it didn't trouble you, but I'm begging you to accept me. Simply tell me what you want, and I'll try. In a moment uncannily like the fair, he waited with his hand outstretched, asking her to accept him. At the fair she thought it was almost over. Now she had the sinking feeling it was only beginning. When they leave the club, they have a quick run-in with Beira, who is her usual horrible self and leaves frost bruises on Keenan's face, which Ashlyn can heal by kissing them. Okay. Whether or not she was angry about becoming one of them no longer mattered. It had stopped mattering when Beira bruised Keenan. An instinct to protect him flared to life in her, an urge she'd felt often enough for her friends, but never for a fairy. Maybe it was the way he'd looked in the club, the growing sense that he was as trapped as she was. Beira couldn't stand against us both, not both the Summer King and Queen. As much as she didn't like that possibility, it sounded right as she thought it. So from Keenan's POV, this is kind of the best thing that could have happened. He is in awe and drops to his knees, staring up at her, golden tears running down his face like rivulets of liquid sunshine. The other fairies dropped to their knees beside him in the dirty alley. My queen. Keenan let go of her other hand to reach up toward her face. And she ran. She ran like she'd never run in her life, crushing the still shimmering ice under her feet, fleeing the sunlight gleaming in Keenan's skin. She runs to Seth's. And she can make herself invisible now. But Seth was busy too, and he used a secret recipe that Donya gave them earlier. And now he can see fairies. Cool. Ash tells him everything that happened, and she suggests to stay the night. But Seth is all, no, I want you to want it because of us, not because of the fairy stuff or because you're scared. That's not the right reason. That doesn't mean you can't stay, just no sex. That still leaves a lot open. Seth took Ashlyn's hand as they walked back to the other train car, the one that he turned into bedroom, but he barely held on. If she wanted to, she could turn and go the other way. She didn't. She wrapped her fingers around his so tightly it probably hurt him. He tells her that she's the first girl that he ever invited into his actual bedroom, and he also shows her his STD tests and says that he gets tested regularly, and he wanted her to know. Seth is just single-handedly restoring my faith in this whole genre. What can I say? Several hours later, Ashlyn felt her hands curling, gripping the comforter. She'd been kissed before, but not like that. Not there. If sex was any better than that, she wasn't sure she'd survive it. That is so dramatic. Also, this is already sex. What are you talking about? Donya, meanwhile, still gets more pressure from Bera, and she finally decides to go speak to Keenan about it. Which is good. Good timing, because Keenan is stressed, jealous, and very impatient. He's really close to just bursting into Seth's to get Aisling. Also, his one advisor, Tavish, the one who had also been giving the really questionable dating advice, he keeps getting clearer in his suggestion of not giving Ash a choice. And we don't really know what he means exactly, but Niall, the other advisor, he's, quote, horrified. So probably not good. Anyway, Donya comes in and she tells Keenan that Bera wants her to kill Ashlyn. So he better hurry with convincing her. Ash, however, has had some thoughts of her own that basically boil down to, okay, I'll be Summer Queen if I have to, but I'm not giving up my mortal life, and especially not Seth. Deal or no deal. But when she gets home, Keenan's waiting for her in front of her grandma's house, of all places. And she's like, let's go for a walk. But before they can, the door opens and it's her grandma. And Keenan just goes, Elena? And Ash's grandma says, you killed my daughter. What? So Ash always thought that her mother had died giving birth to her. She doesn't have any memories of her, and it had been said before that her grandma never really talked about the last year of Ash's mother and of her death. So now we know why. Keenan did not actively murder her, but she was also a chosen one of his, and rather than joining the Summer Girls, Ash's mom decided to end her own life after Ash was born. Yeah, they get Keenan to leave because he still doesn't know how to act in any situation. I don't even think he says sorry at all. Instead, he tries to threaten Ashlyn and Seth. I get that he's under an really incredible amount of pressure, but he really needs to learn how to talk to people. That's probably also what Tavish had been suggesting. Threats and giving Ash drugs again. Ash's grandma, by the way, she's all, okay, evacuation plan, I've saved money for this, pack your bags, get yourself, run to the other end of the world. Let's go. When Keenan gets out, Niall is there and he decides to be the angel on his shoulder to Tavish's devil. And he leads him to a very ugly scene of a fairy getting attacked by a group of other fae from the Dark Court, because that is apparently what they do. And he's essentially imploring Keenan that this isn't the way of the Summer Fae and that free will is important. And Ashlyn doesn't run. She finds Keenan there on the street and she is fierce. She's like, we're gonna set a few things straight here. And you better listen because you're the one that wants something from me. So you better not threaten me or my people. This is a negotiation now. And I love it. Keenan does not know what's happening to him. And Ash just lists, I'm not going to live with you or be with you. I want to keep going to school and then college. And obviously, I'm not leaving Seth. Being Summer Queen is strictly business. She even calls it, she says, I can do this as a job. And Keenan's kind of overwhelmed, and he's also a little hurt because he has it in his head that like his queen is going to be his great love, and she just doesn't want him like that. But she does want them to be friends and to be able to work together. And he's all, hell yes, I'm taking that deal. Let's call Donya, who has the stuff, right now. But she doesn't pick up. So in the meantime, they decide that Keenan and Seth should meet, get to know each other. And they do that. And Keenan's really doing his best, trying to make this a friendship. After watching Ashlyn's and her mortals' faces, Keenan found it much easier to believe that his queen was making the only choice she could. He knew that look, had seen it in the eyes of several girls, had seen it in Donya's eyes. It's a little awkward, but they're all doing their best, and Keenan found it surprisingly tolerable to sit with his queen and her lover. And finally, we reached the ceremony, the one you already know from the prologue. There won't be another girl. Ashlyn grasped the staff, wrapped her fingers around it, and waited. She watched them, the last girl who'd done this, and the fairy king who still loved her. She wished, for them and for herself, that it had been Donya, but it wasn't. It's me. The staff was gripped in her hand, but there was no cold to bring her to her knees. Instead, that blinding glow was no longer coming only from Keenan. It flared from her own skin. Okay, almost done. So, as they are starting to celebrate, a guard comes and he tells them that Beira has taken Seth. And because she doesn't want to stay and watch everyone be happy, now no longer a winter girl, Donya, leaves the group and she's also kidnapped. And yeah, Beira and Seth are held captive by Donya. It's late, I'm tired. Seth and Donya are being held captive by Beira, and it's not nice. And Beira eventually tries to kill Donya with her ice kiss. That is how she kills people, by breathing ice into them. And Seth tries to stop her, so she turns to him, and that is when Ash and Keenan arrive, and it's kind of a mess. Beira stabs Keenan in the chest with an ice blade, and there's an ice wall in the middle of the room, but as expected, Ash and Keenan are much stronger now against Beira's ice. They can melt their way to each other, and Keenan kills Beira the same way that she always kills people, by breathing into her mouth and making her choke on sunlight. And she's dead. Seth is injured, but he's gonna be alright. Healers are on their way. But Donya, not so much. She's very injured from the ice kiss, and Keenan goes to her and holds her in his arms. And he tells her that it isn't like that between him and Ash. She's ruling beside me, but not mine. When you get well, one of the hags knelt beside him, interrupting him. My queen, she rasped. Your staff. The hag held out the Winter Queen's staff, the repository of winter's weight. Keenan's eyes widened. No. The hag smiled her nearly toothless smile and reiterated. My queen, not yours, Summer King. This one, she gestured silently, carries the winter's chill. It grows. Donya is the new Winter Queen. Can that girl get a break? Also, why is no one ever asked before becoming Fae royalty? Like, what's going on there? You just have to do it. But Donya is taking it really well. This doesn't need healing. The winter court is mine. I feel it. The winter Fae, I feel them. Aside from the overwhelming urge to wipe away the horror in Keenan's eyes, Donya wasn't upset. She'd expected to die today. Ruling was far from a bad trade-off. Before it was too late, she wrapped her arms around Keenan and let herself glory in the sort of kiss that they hadn't been able to share in far too long. She takes in the rest of the cold from Beira, and the words came to her from the white world, sliding through her lips like a winter wind. I am the winter queen. As those before me, I will carry the wind and ice. And she was healed, stronger than she'd ever been. Unlike Beira, Donya did not trail icy shards in her path as she went over to Keenan. His sun-kissed tears shimmered as they fell into the puddles on the floor. She reached up to pull him to her, careful to keep her chill contained, thrilled that she could do so now. Then she whispered, I love you. I have always loved you. This doesn't change that. Keenan doesn't react, and Donya turns to Ash and says, we will speak soon, and leaves. And next, we have an epilogue. And it's kind of beautiful. Donya stepping out of her cottage. Outside, her fae waited. Keenan's guards were gone, all but Evan, who'd stayed as the head of her new guard. There were grumblings over that one, a summer fae heading the new Winter Queen's guard, but it wasn't anyone's right to challenge her choices. Not anymore. Silently, Donya stepped onto the now frozen surface of the river, looking up at the steel bridge that crossed the river. No longer poisonous, not for the Winter Queen. She tilted her face to the grey sky and opened her mouth. Wind streaked from her lips. Icicles gathered on the metal of the bridge. She meets with Ashlyn by the river, who can't stay long because of the cold. She's mainly checking in, but before she leaves, Ashlyn says, he loves you, you know? Donya's not really convinced, but she also doesn't want to talk about it. She tells herself, focus on the good. There would be time enough to deal with Iriel, with Keenan, with her fae. Tonight was hers. As quietly as the snow falling around her, Donya turned back to the frozen night and skated across the river, spilling her handful of snow like glitter on the ice. Solstice. Ash and Seth are in Seth's train, where Keenan has just arrived from the cold. She took his hand in hers and concentrated, letting the warmth of summer roll through her. It had become surprisingly easy already, as if it had always been in her. She felt it, a tiny sun blazing inside her, and she leaned over and blew gently in his face. Warm wind poured over him. She kissed both his cheeks. She didn't know why, any more than she understood why she'd done it that night in the alley. It simply seemed right. That was the first thing she had understood about her changes. Listening to her instincts. Keenan stared at her. I didn't ask. Shh. She brushed his copper hair off his forehead and pressed one more kiss there. Friends help each other. Seth comes back in and he goes, there's candles over there, there's food, there's summer wine, and there's winter wine. And Seth and Ashlyn leave, leaving Keenan trapped. And who comes instead? Donya. She heard Keenan pacing, heavy footsteps as he moved angrily, like a caged thing. It didn't frighten her, that temper, that dangerous energy. For the first time, they'd meet with equal strength, equal power, equal passion. I hope. And they meet. She wrapped her hand around his wrist and pulled him closer. Every bit of her body burned, as if she were nothing more than an ice carving, ready to melt from the touch of the sun. Her eyes rose to meet that sun, wrapping them both in a snow squall. I still love you, have always loved you. She wouldn't say it, but she thought it over and over as the flowers blossomed in his eyes, as the flare of sunlight made her tremble. Mine, you're finally mine, he whispered. Then his lips came down on hers. She wanted to laugh for joy, weep for the sizzle of ice and heat as they fell into the snowbank at their feet. Ash and Seth used the evening to introduce Seth to Ash's grandma and to talk about college. Even after almost 3 months, they weren't any less terrifying, not really, but Ashlyn felt safe for the first time in her life. It's not anywhere near perfect, but it can be. Using Seth's hand for leverage, she pulled him closer. Let's go home. They walked through the snowy streets, her skin glowing enough to keep them both warm. The rest, her fears, the court's demands, Keenan's worries, it would all wait. When the Summer Queen rejoiced, her fae would too. And so she rejoiced, letting that feeling spread out to her fae, feeling it echo back from Keenan, seeing it reflected in Seth's eyes. It's not perfect, but it will be. The end. That was Wicked Lovely by Melissa Marr. Happy ending. I love it. Could this all have been avoided by Ash and Keenan just talking much earlier? Maybe. But I guess there were some fairy rules against that. And I also think Keenan needed some time for character development. I absolutely love this overall message of be with the person that makes you feel good, makes you feel safe, and not with someone that might might be attractive but scares you. That's, yeah. I found it a little odd that we never see anything of Seth's perspective. We never get his POV, and I think that's kind of a missed opportunity to give him a bit more depth and make him be more real, more than just what Ash needs him to be. Like, I would have liked to see some of his own thoughts and his struggles with this whole situation. Yeah, just make him feel more real. But he definitely was a great contrast to Keenan's creepiness. And I don't want to overcomplicate it, but I feel like Keenan got his happy end a little bit too easy. I mean, obviously, his situation for the last 1,000 years has not been easy, but I just would have liked for him to gain an understanding of what he's been putting all these girls through. It wasn't by choice, like, ultimately, Beira is to blame for all of it, but I just think it could have been addressed more. He could have felt bad about it. It could have been interesting, like seeing him having to do these really bad things that he acknowledges as bad, but knowing that he has to do them for his people, for the world, for, yeah, the entire earth. But yeah, still having him deal with guilt, shame, and maybe over time pushing it away and him getting kind of numb. And then now that it's all over, maybe the guilt comes back and he has to deal with that. And it could influence his relationship with Donya. It could influence his view of the summer girls. Yeah, what we got so far from his thoughts is he wasn't concerned with Ash or the other girls. He was thinking of his problems, which are huge, but yeah, he was thinking about what Ash could be to him, and he was also thinking creepy stalker thoughts. Yeah, I would have liked for him to get that and get some self-awareness about that. Yeah, but I still liked how it ended, and also it's only the end of book one, so there's much to come probably. I think book two will address some internal fairy world problems with the dark fae probably, because it's been hinted that there's some political instabilities and problems with the dark court. Will I be doing part two, book two? Will I be doing book two? Maybe. We'll see. It might take some time though. So you are very welcome to follow this channel if you don't want to miss it. I cannot tell you when I will upload next time. But yeah, I think that's it. Thank you for being here. I hope you had fun. I had fun. And have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.